Hey everybody, Captain Murphy here. An update on the Canon progress. We've been having issues trying to get the animations to tie to the sounds, and because of the new mechanism in which CryEngine uses, they actually use the mannequin editor to attach to the animation that is supposed to occur during the firing of the cannons. That's been kind of problematic. No one can give us really good documentation. So in the interim, what I've done is I've gone in and created a new cannon class. This is the same thing as the heavy weapon turrets. So you go near the object, it gives you a usable or a non-usable functionality to it. So this is the cannon when we're done here. If you look in your entity properties on the right-hand side, what I've done is I've inherited all the things that existed for the mountable cannons. So we've got a pitch max, a pitch min, and a yaw. In other words, you can jump into the cannon and limit each individual cannon entity based on how far you want it to turn left and right and up and down. The carriage and the gun are actually one piece right now. Later on, we're going to try to split that into two, so that way the carriage is the yaw and then the cannon barrel is actually going to be the pitch. But for now, I mean, we're still at the very beginning of the stages on this. When you select the mounted and then select the usable status on this, that turns this thing into a usable cannon. You can run over to it and it gives you a little option to say use cannon, like my other videos showed, has that little flashing thing saying use cannon. So what you do is you've actually got a new class in here. So you're looking at your cannon. This is the Cannon 24 pound. It's a class of cannon. So that brings in all the information that was in that object. So now when we define these things under the mount parameters under the XML, that gives us the pitch min, the pitch max, the yaw range, all those things that would be inherited, which you can override by going into the entity and actually setting them yourself. But with this here, this gives us the option, you know, we can set every cannon to have this as its base values, and then you can set each one independently however you want. In order to do this, though, I've had to actually override a couple of different things. So first of all, I created a new class that had to be registered with the game engine. Was a real pain in the butt to make sure all that worked. Once that was working, then I went into the item LUA file, the Lua there, and I created a new item table for the Cannon 24 pound. So that only inherits this 24 pound that I've created. It doesn't inherit all cannon classes, only that one item. So once this one is created, I added the properties so that the engine can see it for the mounted, the usable, pickable, and then the mounted limits. So when you're looking in the editor, that's how I got this pitch min, pitch max, and the yaw in here. They don't normally show up unless you have the item Lua updated. It also inherits all the other things that the other HMG does. So I've got the on reset, on spawn, on use, etc. These were all just a copy of the original ones, which was the HMG, which is your heavy mounted guns. So I just kind of copied over what I needed in order to make this work. I'm sure we'll tweak this a little bit later to make it work a little bit better. So anyway, so at this point now you can drop the item in there, the editor works, and you see a cannon pop in. And with the Cannon 24 pound, of course, we've defined all the other objects, the cannonball and things like that. The cannonball itself is actually a separate object, so it defines itself as far as the mass and the speed and radius, things like that. So this all works. But what we couldn't get was the sound to fire because the animations wouldn't actually execute at the right time, so we ended up with a cannon with no sound. So what I've gone to is I went into the actual the back-end code for the DLL. So where I created that cannon class, what I had to do is actually add a couple of features to the shared parameters that the cannon inherits from the heavy weapon, which then inherits from the weapon, which then inherits from the item. So what I ended up with is I added these options here to only show if you're bringing in what's considered the mount parameters. So under this XML, we see we've got mount right here. If you have mount in there, then whenever you're looking at this class, it's going to have these options. It's the shoot sound FP, which is first person, and the shoot sound TP, which is third person. If these exist, they see right there, they're also down here, they're strings. If those two objects exist and you're using a mounted weapon, then what it will do is override the weapon event here. So when you do the fire, you've got the C weapon on shoot. This tells you that the weapon was fired. it's going to inherit this. It's going to look and see whether or not you've got a sound name declared inside your XML. And so you can see right here, I've got these two parameters that are the SoundChute FP, SoundChute TP, and I've defined the two sounds that Woodori provided for the gun. So because those exist, and because we're looking at a mounted weapon, the engine now sees that, yes, we see an item string. If the shared parameters has a mount parameters, I had to add this because if you didn't add this, what would end up happening is it would bomb out because it never did bring in the mount parameters because the mount inside the XML here wasn't declared. So what would happen is you'd fire your SCAR and it would crash because it never actually read the mount because there wasn't a mount in the SCAR's XML. So what this had to do is just had to make sure that you do have mount parameters enabled. Once you've done that, because this would end up being a null value, the sound name. So if sound name exists, then it goes ahead and it says, all right, I'm going to construct a sound name off of what this, if you're looking at first person, then pull in the first person. If you're in third person, then pull in third person. And then it creates a sound proxy and fires off that sound when you're in the game. The only downside to this is that we're not doing it exactly like the engine is supposed to be used. However, the upside is that now we can just define our first person and third person sounds through an XML rather than having to go into the animation editor and doing it all this way. So the cannons could be generally static, which most cannons, I don't think we're going to be spending a whole lot of time dealing with a lot of the recoil energies and stuff like that and watching them slide around and things. So for the most part, we could make small parrot cannons and things like that that don't have a recoil energy. Just use these parameter names and you have sound. And we're not having to worry about going through the engine and making animations and tying them. It really would be a pain in the butt for modding later on without these XMLs being just that easy to override. So anyway, I'm going to cut over to my other video tool and I'm going to show you what happens and just do a quick overview on what the engine has as far as what limitations I've run into so far. So anyway, let me do that real quick. Alright, so now we're looking in the actual game engine, and you can see that we've got our 24-pound cannon right here. This is the one that I showed declared in all of the other the portions here. And so we're going to jump into the game, and if you fire your SCAR, that same weapon event that occurs during this firing here and then generates the sound that it creates is actually the exact same one that fires during the firing of these cannons. So that overriding that I've done is going to determine that this gun that I'm using here is not a mounted gun. And because it's not a mounted gun, I have no mounted parameters, it doesn't even look for an override for the sound yet. When we do get around to creating our own gun animations, because those are going to go through a normal animation pattern, we're going to actually have to do all the rigging to make them work. I don't see the point yet in overriding sounds just for small guns. I kind of see that they really need to go through the animation process. But with cannons, they're kind of a different animal. We're looking at a mounted gun that eventually we're going to have these separate cannon and carriages, and we're going to have a lot of different class changes on this thing. So I think we're going to really need to work on this one. But anyway, so now that we have the new cannon here, the one thing I do have an issue that's still prevalent is that when you fire the first round, there's a delay. It doesn't catch up to the first round. So when you fire this first one, you'll hear that the cannon firing is actually like quarter second behind. But now that we've got this sound, I'm guessing it must cache it at this point. As soon as we've got this item in, it's now right when the cannon fires. So as soon as we click on the mouse, we're hearing the sound and everything is lined up with the actual movement of the round. Of course, the cannons do have damage to them. They do sink any objects, they do cause damage. So as of right now, we have a working cannon. It's not the prettiest animations right now. We'll have to eventually get around to where the animations are a little more realistic. But at this point, we can start mounting these things on turrets and parapets, things like that, and actually start sinking things. So anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys. Let me know if you have any suggestions.